Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel met as schoolboys in Queens, New York, in the early 1950s. They sang together on street corners, played in school productions, and dreamed of making it big, never imagining they would one day become the most celebrated folk rock duo of their generation. Their harmonies seemed inseparable, their voices blending as if they had been destined to meet. But behind the beauty of the music was a friendship that grew more fragile with each success. What began as a story of childhood companions chasing the same dream ended in silence, bitterness, and words neither man could take back. From Queens to the charts. Paul Simon first noticed Art Garfunkel in 1953 during a fourth-grade talent show at Public School 164. Art, with his clear, soaring voice, impressed everyone in the room, including Paul. A few years later, they acted together in a school play, with Paul cast as the White Rabbit and Art as the Cheshire Cat. From then on, the boys grew close, spending afternoons listening to rock and roll on the radio, studying the Everly Brothers, and experimenting with harmonies. By 1957, just 15 years old, they decided to make their first record. They pooled together $25 and recorded Hey Schoolgirl under the playful name Tom and Jerry. To their amazement, the single sold over 100,000 copies and even landed them a spot on Dick Clark's American Bandstand. For two boys from Queens, this was a taste of stardom. Yet early success did not last. Their follow-up singles failed to chart, and both went off to college, Simon studying English at Queens College and Garfunkel architecture at Columbia University. But the cracks in their friendship were already beginning to show. In 1958, without telling Garfunkel, Simon recorded a solo single under the alias True Taylor. When Art found out, he felt betrayed, and though they continued to work together occasionally, that hidden sense of mistrust would resurface again and again. By 1964, they had reunited under their real names and signed with Columbia Records. Their debut album, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., sold poorly, just 3,000 copies. Simon left for England to pursue a solo career, while Garfunkel stayed in New York to continue his studies. It seemed their story might have ended before it had truly begun. The breakthrough and uneven partnership. Everything changed almost by accident. In 1965, Boston DJ Dick Summer began playing The Sound of Silence, a song from Simon and Garfunkel's forgotten debut album. College students loved it, and soon it was spreading down the East Coast. Columbia producer Tom Wilson noticed and decided to experiment. Without telling Simon or Garfunkel, he hired session musicians to overdub electric guitar, bass, and drums onto the track. When Paul Simon first heard the remix, he was horrified. It sounded messy to him, but by January 1966, the single had reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Suddenly, the duo was famous again. Simon rushed back from England, leaving behind his girlfriend Kathy Chitty, and reunited with Garfunkel in New York. CBS demanded a follow-up album immediately, and within 3 weeks they recorded Sounds of Silence. Much of it came from Paul's solo material, but hits like I Am a Rock and Homeward Bound cemented their place in the American folk rock scene. Yet even in triumph, there was tension. Some critics derided them as a commercial imitation of folk, but Paul was determined to prove himself as a songwriter of substance. By the time they began work on Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme in late 1966, Simon insisted on total control in the studio, directing every instrument, every part, while Garfunkel and producer Roy Haley listened from the control room. Paul was only 26, but he felt he had finally made it, spiritually closer to Bob Dylan than to the pop acts around him. For Art, things looked different. He sang beautifully, yes, but his creative role was smaller. Simon was shaping the sound and writing the words, and that imbalance was quietly becoming a wound. At the same time, their fame grew. A Hazy Shade of Winter reached the top 20, and they began filling college auditoriums across the country. Their poetic image, aloof, intellectual, somewhat mysterious, set them apart. But the friendship that had once been about afternoons of shared discovery was starting to feel like a business partnership. The Graduate, Bookends, and Rising Fame. In 1967, director Mike Nichols was deep into filming The Graduate when he became captivated by Simon and Garfunkel's records. He asked Columbia's Clive Davis if he could use their music for the soundtrack. At first, Paul Simon hesitated, worried it would feel like selling out, but after meeting Nichols, he agreed to contribute. He promised 3 new songs, though in truth, touring kept him from delivering. When Nichols asked what else he had, Simon mentioned an unfinished tune. That fragment became Mrs. Robinson, a song that would not only define the film, but also win Record of the Year at the Grammys. The success of The Graduate propelled the duo into a new orbit. Their 4th studio album, Bookends, was released in April 1968, just 1 day before the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. The timing cast a shadow across the record's release, but its impact was undeniable. The album climbed to #1 on the charts and stayed there for 7 weeks. Tracks like America and The Boxer captured the alienation and searching spirit of the late 1960s. Yet making the record had been grueling. Simon battled writer's block, sometimes spending more than 50 hours perfecting a single song. Harmonies that once came easily now required endless retakes, often note by note, until the duo was satisfied. For Garfunkel, the spotlight was finally shifting in his favor. His crystalline voice took the lead on several songs, and critics praised his performances. Paul, however, felt the sting. The applause always seemed louder for Art, even though the words and melodies were his. That imbalance brought back an old wound from childhood when Paul's mother once told him, "You have a good voice, Paul, but Arthur has a fine voice." Decades later, he would admit that those words never left him. As their fame grew, Bookends and The Graduate selling millions, it was becoming harder to keep the friendship at the center. Success had amplified every insecurity, every slight, every hidden resentment. Catch-22. Bridge Over Troubled Water, and The Breaking Point. By 1969, Simon and Garfunkel were at the very top of the music world, but their friendship was unraveling. Mike Nichols, who had given them their biggest break with The Graduate, invited both to act in his new film, Catch-22. Garfunkel was cast as Captain Nately, while Simon was supposed to play Dunbar. But screenwriter Buck Henry cut Simon's role, leaving only Garfunkel in the cast. It was a blow Simon never forgot. Suddenly, his partner had a film career, and he had been left behind. Art promised the shoot in Mexico would last only 6 weeks, but it dragged on for months. Meanwhile, Simon stayed in New York trying to complete what would become their final album, Bridge Over Troubled Water. The long-distance collaboration quickly turned sour. Simon sent songs, Garfunkel mailed back notes. Nothing felt right. It was a recipe for the breakup, Simon later admitted. The sessions became lopsided. Paul wrote and produced, while Art was physically absent. On some tracks, Garfunkel barely appears, and on others not at all. Yet when Garfunkel's voice did come through, it was unforgettable. The title track, with Art singing the soaring lead, became one of the most iconic songs in popular music. Audiences leapt to their feet whenever he performed it live. But for Simon, each standing ovation was a reminder of his own invisibility. "I wrote that song," he thought bitterly. His resentment was fed by childhood memories of being told that Art had the finer voice. That old wound resurfaced every night. Despite the tension, Bridge Over Troubled Water was a masterpiece. Released in January 1970, it topped charts in more than 10 countries, sold over 25 million copies, and won 6 Grammys, including Album of the Year. But success could not heal the rift. Their final concert as a duo took place later that year at Forest Hills Stadium in Queens, just blocks from where they had grown up. There was no announcement, no dramatic fight. They simply walked off stage, said goodbye quietly, and never returned as a permanent duo again. Years later, Simon would explain. With Artie, there was no reason to talk about it. It just ended breakup years, reunions, and new betrayals. After Bridge Over Troubled Water, Simon and Garfunkel went their separate ways. Paul plunged into a solo career, releasing Paul Simon, There Goes Ryman Simon, and Still Crazy after all these years. Songs like Me and Julio, Down by the Schoolyard, and 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover showed that he could thrive without art. Garfunkel, meanwhile, pursued both music and acting. His solo records included Angel Clare with the single All I Know, and he won praise for his roles in Mike Nichols's Catch-22 and Carnal Knowledge. But while their careers continued, their friendship was reduced to the occasional phone call. The 1970s brought several reunions, each one brief and fragile. In 1972, they sang together at a benefit for presidential candidate George McGovern. In 1975, they appeared on Saturday Night Live and recorded My Little Town, released on both of their solo albums. The song was a success, but instead of rekindling their partnership, it only underscored how separate their paths had become. In 1977, they joined James Taylor for a cover of Sam Cooke's Wonderful World. Each time they reunited, the old magic was there musically, but the tension behind the scenes quickly returned. By 1981, both men's careers were faltering, and promoter Ron Delsener suggested a free concert in Central Park. More than 500,000 people showed up on September 19th, creating one of the largest audiences in American history. The live album went double platinum, and the HBO special revived interest in their music. On stage, they smiled, they harmonized, and the crowd believed in the reunion. Off stage, it was another story. By 1982, during their world tour, Simon and Garfunkel barely spoke to each other. Warner Brothers pushed them to record a new studio album, but sessions collapsed into arguments. Simon took the material and released it alone as Hearts and Bones. Garfunkel's vocals, already recorded, were wiped from the tapes. For Art, this was an unforgivable betrayal. Even when they tried again in the late 1980s, their bond never healed. At their 1990 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, Garfunkel thanked Simon for enriching his life. Simon quipped, "Arthur and I agree about almost nothing. But it's true, I have enriched his life quite a bit." They left the stage without speaking to each other. The friendship that had begun in a school play in Queens was by now deeply scarred. Awards, tours, and the final silence. The 1990s began with Simon and Garfunkel standing together on stage at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that moment of honor did little to bridge the divide. Simon declined Garfunkel's invitation to join his 1991 Central Park concert, signaling that their partnership was still fractured. For much of the decade, they alternated between reconciliation and distance. In 1993, they toured internationally, beginning with sold-out shows at New York's Paramount Theater and moving through Asia. But by the mid-1990s, old wounds had returned. They were friends in memory, adversaries in practice. In 2001, when Paul Simon was inducted into the Hall of Fame as a solo artist, he publicly expressed regret over the broken friendship, saying he hoped they would make peace someday before we die, adding wryly, "No rush." 2 years later, promoters finally convinced them to reunite properly. At the 2003 Grammy Awards, they accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award and opened the show with The Sound of Silence. The crowd erupted, and for a moment, it felt as if time had rewound. That autumn, the Old Friends Tour began, selling out arenas across America and grossing more than $120 million. In 2004, they toured Europe, closing with a massive free concert in Rome before 600,000 people, even larger than their Central Park gathering. But the warmth never lasted. By 2009, they were performing again in Asia and Australia, only to see it all unravel once more. In 2010, Garfunkel's voice began to fail after he choked on a piece of lobster, damaging his vocal cords. Diagnosed with paresis, he struggled to sing. Their headlining set at the New Orleans Jazz Festival that year was painful. Garfunkel nervous and hoarse, Simon forced to carry the weight. The remaining tour dates were canceled, though they reunited briefly that summer to sing Mrs. Robinson at a tribute to Mike Nichols. Their future together was over. Simon admitted bluntly, "We don't get along." It's not fun. After decades of breakups, reunions, and betrayals, the silence between them was finally permanent. Reflection, legacy, and fragile reconciliation. After 2010, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel's paths diverged for good. Simon focused on his solo career, touring and recording until his health began to slow him in the 2020s. Garfunkel, after years of vocal therapy, slowly regained strength, performing small shows in Harlem and before underground audiences. But their partnership was effectively over. In interviews, Garfunkel spoke with bitterness, calling Simon an idiot for walking away from what they had built. Simon, for his part, dismissed any hope of a reunion, saying the relationship was simply too fractious to make performing enjoyable. And yet, time has a way of softening even the deepest wounds. In 2024, Garfunkel admitted he had been a fool and revealed that he and Simon had reconciled as friends. The following spring, he hinted at the possibility of performing together again. "We may give it a try and see where it leads." For fans, it was a flicker of hope, though most accepted that the golden years of Simon and Garfunkel had long since passed. Their legacy, however, remains untouchable. They were the voice of a generation searching for meaning in the 1960s, the poets of alienation and comfort. Songs like The Sound of Silence, Mrs. Robinson, The Boxer, and Bridge Over Troubled Water continue to echo through time. They sold more than 100 million records, won 7 Grammy Awards, and in 1990 were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But their greatest achievement may be the enduring way their music captures both beauty and sadness. The harmony of two boys from Queens who became legends, even as friendship slipped away. Simon and Garfunkel's story is both inspiring and tragic. Two childhood friends who created timeless music but could not escape the shadows of pride, jealousy, and betrayal. What do you think hurt their friendship the most? Fame, ego, or simply time pulling them apart? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from music history.